Okay, Chapter 2, Part 2, picking up with comparing and contrasting the development of Virginia and Maryland, which we went over just a minute ago. Just to briefly review what the beginnings were, Virginia was founded as a joint stock company. It sent people out for what we talked about in Chapter 1, the 3 G's, gold, God, and glory, and expected a really profit turnaround. Maryland was founded as a proprietary colony, so just by one land grant was given to Calvert, Lord Baltimore, and he was given full and free absolute power, envisioned the colony as a refuge for persecuted co-religionists and Catholic sons that had no inheritance possibilities in Europe. Economic successes, Virginia had struggled for years until, as it searched for gold and riches, until it began to grow tobacco and became a fast cash crop for the colony. Also used the headright system. That was an incentive. If you were coming over as an indentured servant because you had no money, besides getting labor for the next few years, those who could afford to bring people over as an indentured servant would gain 50 acres for every person they brought over with them. Maryland prospered very quickly, grew tobacco as well, and grew very easily in Maryland. Coastal access for them was great for easy shipping, and again also offered indentured servants the idea of freedom dues, a lot of times even greater freedom dues than others, more acreage as an incentive. Social issues, Virginia definitely had a class system going. Virginia's social and political elite were the wealthy planters. They were on top of the social ladder. Then the smaller farmers, most of them former indentured servants, and then the poor laborers took up the bottom of the social ladder. Women mostly arrived as indentured servants, usually had to delay marriage and starting a family if you became pregnant during your indentured servant contract. Your length of contract was lengthened so that you had to work the entire time. Women had a greater chance of having legal independence and standing in the colonies, in the Chesapeake colonies, just because they were more of a rare occurrence to have women in the Chesapeake colonies. Is also a very high death rate. Maryland had social issues tied more to religious differences between the Catholics and the Protestants. Catholic gentlemen were usually given priority choices of land until some of the later disagreements between the two. For religious differences in Maryland, they started out with the Maryland Act of Toleration. And that act will basically say that they will tolerate any Christian-based religion. So to try to alleviate some of that animosity between the Catholics and the Protestants within that colony. Now, if you weren't a Christian-based religion or you were of no religion, then sometimes it wasn't unheard of for the penalty to be the death penalty in that colony. So only tolerant of Christian-based religions. The significance of religion as a motivation for colonization. I know we reviewed this one a little bit in Chapter 1, but to what extent is it accurately in the English settlement of New England? And in which ways, basically, the settlement of New England become very distinctive. Settling New England, most of the people who come in and settle New England are middle-class families. They've paid their own way. Very few become indentured servants. It's a much healthier climate. The colder weather means less diseases and longer life expectancy. They're usually older, more prosperous colonists. Population grew rapidly, doubling in numbers every 27 years. And they are motivated by religious ideals, very devout Puritans. They want to create an ideal society to purify the Church of Catholic and Anglican rituals, live by a code of laws based on government and biblical principles. Church and state were together. The rise of Puritanism, those that were not satisfied with the progress of the Protestant Reformation called themselves true Protestants and said that the Church of England had too many rituals and doctrines. They followed the ideas of John Calvin, that you were predestined before you were even born, that you were part of the elect, the saved, going to heaven, or those that were not. And no, there were no guarantees on salvation, but idleness, immoral behavior, those would be very sure signs that you were not one of the saved. So Puritan work ethic was widely known because of how hard they worked trying to prove, because a successful, happy life meant that you were one of the saved. So they would spend their life working tirelessly so that they would be one of the saved going to heaven. They would immigrate to New England area with leaders like John Winthrop, wanting to be that city upon a hill, that example society, free from those religious corruptions and rituals that they criticized from the Church of England. They want to be an example city set apart for everyone to see. For the looking at that Plymouth and going back with the Puritan family, patriarchal society was something with men's role and authority was the head of the house. Women had limited legal and economic rights, but they were often seen as spiritual equals of men, allowed to become church members. They were responsible for the religious upbringing of their families. And the whole thing with Puritans is focusing on the community, monitoring each other's behavior and chastising or expelling those who might violate those norms within the community. For Plymouth, Puritan refugees on the Mayflower land off course at Cape Cod, led by William Bradford, and had escaped persecution. Many of them were separatists. Separatists were different than Puritans because they wanted to completely separate from the Church of England, whereas Puritans were still technically members of the Church of England. Separatists broke away completely. They had first fled to Holland, but many of their children were being drawn to the culture there, and so they will leave and go to the New World. The Mayflower Compact, when they land off course, gives them the freedom to build their own legal system and charter themselves. And so they formed the Mayflower Compact, which was an agreement to abide by laws made by their chosen leaders, basically agreeing to abide by majority rule. With the Mayflower Compact, members of the government and church were usually the same because only church members could be representatives. And like I said, with majority rule, they agreed to abide by just and equal laws. They chose a site of an abandoned Indian village where the fields had already been cleared just before an epidemic hit the village. And so they have land that will be ready to cultivate. They also had assistance from some of the local natives, such as Squanto. He was a Native American who had been captured and brought to Spain, had learned English before returning, and showed the colonists how to grow maize, how to fish. The next fall, they had a bumper crop of corn, fur trade, and they're going to celebrate with a feast, inspiration for Thanksgiving celebration. The Massachusetts Bay Colony was intended to be a holy commonwealth like Plymouth. Many Congregationalists, they wanted to. It was made up of Puritans who wanted to purify the church by setting up that example society. John Winthrop was the leader of that, felt called to form that city upon a hill. So he took the royal charter with him, which was unique, by taking the actual charter with him, transferred power and government authority to Massachusetts Bay, becoming a self-governing community, unlike Virginia Company, which was managed from London by that joint stock company. The Great Migration, as people started to escape England or Britain for religious freedom, over the next decade, over 80,000 came for religious freedom and economic opportunity. And Winthrop believed civil order was an essential, and any dissenters would be persecuted with punishment, prison, banishment, or even execution. Other migrants came and went to the West Indies with tobacco, which later changed to growing more sugarcane, makes a lot more money than the other colonies combined by the late 18th century. And the structure of government within these is that they would have a general court with two houses, a House of Assistants, like the House of Lords, and a House of Deputies, which was like the House of Commons. They would elect a governor, but they felt that excessive individuality and a lack of social unity would bring down the community, so they were very focused on the community and agreement among members and church members. Big focus on religion, which also tied to a focus on education. A lot more education in the New England colonies than the others. First higher education institution was founded in 1636, and that was Harvard. Okay, for the next one, identifying the causes of discord early in New England and what was the most threatening, with how, just kind of overall looking at those. When it came to dissenters, like I said in the last slide, Dissenters were persecuted. Those that were in the Puritan colonies saw dissension or disagreements as dangerous. Rhode Island had two very famous ones. Roger Williams, who arrived in 1631, a minister, wanted to strengthen religion, caused problems because he was a purist of Puritans. He saw God's purpose in everything, championed liberty, promotes mercy, said a true covenant was not between God and a congregation, but between God and the individual. So taking out that middle step of the church, even asked, why is a church even necessary? And so questioning that church authority is not going to go over well. Promoted a separation of church and state, saying that government would eventually corrupt church. Said all faiths should be considered equal and government should not be forced on the natives. He was banished to England, but he will slip away with his family and end up setting up the first permanent settlement in Rhode Island, which was Providence, and promoted religious freedom. Rhode Island overall becomes a refuge for the rogues, those that don't really fit in, basically kind of like the island of misfit toys. They will very much promote and foster diversity. Anne Hutchinson was among those that were dissenters with Puritans, started having meetings in her home, led religious discussions. She was very articulate, very intelligent, well-read, well-versed in her Bible, very strong-willed, and claimed to have direct revelations from God. Criticized the church, and preaching good conduct would ensure your salvation. And because of these ideas, she was put on trial for sedition or spreading dangerous ideas. She challenged the legitimacy of the ministers of the church authority, which basically would undermine the entire social system of that area. And her antinomianism was that you were free from obeying moral laws by one's own faith and God's grace, basically saying that you didn't have to abide by the strict moral code that the Puritans preached. She was finally convicted for her claims to get those direct revelations from God and was exiled to Portsmouth, which was just south of Providence, Rhode Island. New England, as it expands, Connecticut, founded by Thomas Hooker, who took 3 congregations away from Massachusetts Bay. They adopt the Fundamental Orders of Connecticut, the first constitution within the colonies. Congregational churches were their official religion. New Hampshire and Maine were founded in 1622. New Hampshire was controlled later by Massachusetts until it became a royal colony in 1679, and Maine will be controlled as a proprietary of Massachusetts and later absorbed into its charter. New England economy overall first and foremost, it was founded for religious reasons. Most were middle-class families, so they had a little more money to them than other regions of the colonies, but their exports are a lot of timber, fishing, not a lot of farms. Most farming or agriculture that was grown was for the community needs and very much relying on families for needs. The merchants, the businessmen were the elite. Wealth was much more evenly distributed in the New England colonies than in the Chesapeake, where you have that social class system. They began trading with England, challenged some of the Puritan principles, and then some of the challenges and economic reasons were why the Halfway Covenant comes into play. Halfway Covenant, as Puritan church leaders saw that church membership was starting to decline because later generations were more concerned with their economic prosperity than their religious development, and keeping that relationship going, began to relax the qualifications to be members of the church, allowing for baptism and halfway membership for the grandchildren of the elect. But the church membership numbers will still continue to fall. Commercialization and religion both were very big factors in the development of the New England area overall.